Hey friends, what's up? And welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Hey, Daf 5 of Masechta Megilla. Friends, who can tell me what Daf Hey talks about? Well, Daf Hey talks a little bit about reading Megillah on Purim. We also get to a new Mishnah, and we discuss a few different things, including doing malacha, doing activities on Purim. So, friends, that's what we're going to be discussing over here. Let's jump in. We are on the top of Daf Hey Amud Aleph of Masechta Megillah. The very top line of the page, Amar Rav, says Rav, wow, my voice is like to a large degree back. I mean, I'm coughing. What can I tell you? But feels pretty okay. So it says Rav, Megillah bizmana kornosa afilu b'yochid. So when we're talking about reading the Megillah on time, like on the 14th day of Adar, so then even an individual fellow can read the Megillah. You don't need a quorum of 10 men. Shelo bizmana ba'asara. Whereas if it's not the 14th of Adar, for example, if the villages are reading, on an earlier date, well then Yidavka need a quorum of 10 men, a minyan. Ravasi Omar says Ravasi bein bizmana bein shelo bizmana. Whether we're talking about on the 14th of Adar at its proper time, whether we're talking about at an earlier time, ba'asara, either way you need a minyan. Hava uvda taka ma'ase. V'choshle Rav l'Adar Ravasi. Now, and Rav, so there was a certain time, I guess, when even they were reading the Megillah on Purim, and still Rav preferred to have a quorum, a minyan, even though it was on Purim, and he says that technically on Purim itself you could read it as an individual. Alright, sounds like a good story. Umi Amar Rav Hochi, fact the Gemara, 1 second. Does Rav really say this? Does Rav really say that when it's not its proper time, so then you need a quorum, and on its proper time you don't need a quorum? Ve'omer Rav Yehuda brother of Shmuel bar Shilas mishmei Rav. It says of Yehuda brother of Shmuel bar Shilas in the name of Rav. Purim shchalils b'Shabbos. If you have Purim that falls out on a Shabbos, Erev Shabbos Manam, so we say Erev Shabbos is its time. So what does that mean? What does it mean that when Purim falls out on Shabbos, so then Erev Shabbos is its time? So Erev Shabbos Zmanam va Shabbos Manam. I thought Shabbos is talk of the time. So Ella Lab Ochi Komer. So we want to say it. This is what Rav is saying, is that Shelo Bizmanam Kizmanam. That we treat not at its proper time like its proper time. As manam afilu b'yochid, av shelo b'zmanam afilu b'yochid. That just like at its proper time, so then even an individual can read from the Megillah. So then maybe I will say even when it's not its regular time, even if it's a day earlier, so then even an individual would be able to read from the Megillah. So we say no le'inyan mikra Megillah ba'asara. No, it's talking about, so when it comes to reading, the Megillah, so that would have to be with 10, right? So, right, meaning we wanted to say a second ago, that what Rav is saying is that if Shabbos Zmanam, right, means that just like on its proper time you can read by an individual, so also when it's not its proper time it can be read by an individual. So we say, Lo l'inyan mikra Megillah ba'asara. No, when it comes to reading the Megillah, so you're going to have 10 people, because since it's not at its proper time, Taka have to have 10 people. Elamai Erev Shabbos Manam. So then what does it mean that Erev Shabbos is its time? Because after all, Shabbos is its time. Slafuka midir Rebbe, no, it's to the exclusion of Rebbe. Of course, Rebbe had said that once already they're not reading on Shabbos, so then it should get pushed early, bumped up to Thursday, not to Friday, to the Yom HaKnisa. So Rav is saying, no, Erev Shabbos Manam, that in that situation, when Purim falls out on Shabbos, you don't bump it up like Rebbe to the Yom HaKnisa, rather you read it on Friday. The Erev Shabbos Manam, who is teaching us that Taka Erev Shabbos is the time to read the Megillah. Alright. That Taka sounds like a lot of fun. Says the Mishnah, Ezri Ir Gedola. What's considered a large city? If there are 10 people who the only thing that they need to do is be in the synagogue, so that there's always 10 people in the synagogue. But if it's a place that doesn't have 10 people, whose job it is to always be in the synagogue, so that is not considered a large city, it's considered a village. When it comes to reading the Megillah, so we're saying Makdimin v'lo ma'achrin, but we'll read it earlier rather than later, right? Of course, the pasuk says v'lo yavor, that we don't read the Megillah after Purim, right? So we're saying over here that the villages, they could bump up reading the Megillah earlier than Purim, but not later. Aval zman atze kehanim, but as we learned about Masechta Taanis, there are those days when certain families would bring wood for the service in the temple on the altar, and they would bring korbanos with it. So v'tishabav, as well as tishabav, chagiga, the korban chagiga on the shalosh regalim. So, for example, at the beginning of Sukkot, so you bring a korban chagiga, shalmei chagiga, korban shlomim. So, if let's say the first day of Yom Tif is a Shabbos, so you're not going to bring the Korban Chagiga on Shabbos. So rather than bumping it up earlier, you'll offer it later. V'hakol, as well as hakol, that on the 8th year of the Shemitah cycle, i.e. the first year of the Shemitah cycle, so on the second day of Sukkot, so the king reads from the Torah in front of all the people. So if that's a Shabbos, so they push it off. So ma'achrim v'lo makdimin, in those cases they taka, right? So b'dezmanat sekoanim ve'ha'om, as well as tishabav, chagiga, hakol, in all these cases, if they can't do it on the proper time, so rather than bumping it up, like we see over here by Megillah, they push it off. Ma'achrim v'lo makdimin, they do it later. Afal pisha amu makdimin mutarin behespit. And even though we say that they can bump up the Kriyas Megillah, right? So let's say Purim is on a Wednesday, so they bump up for the villages to read on Monday. So even though it's not actually Purim, right? Purim is Wednesday, but in this example, but they're reading the Megillah on Monday. But Mutar and Behesped, so you're allowed to eulogize on that day because it's not Purim with Taanis, and you can fast Matanos Levionim, and you can deliver gifts to the poor on that day, even though it's not actually Purim. Alright. Says Rabbi Yehuda, so when do we say these halachis about these villages going to the large cities and reading Megillah early? That's makom shenichnosim b'sheni v'chamishi. Let's talk about a situation where anyways these villages are coming in on Mondays and Thursdays. Haval, but makom shenichnosim lo b'sheni v'chamishi. But if we're talking about villages that do not normally go into the larger cities on Monday and Thursday, so then they can only read Megillah at its proper time. Right? In situations where you have these villages that are anyways going in on Monday and Thursday to the large cities, so in those cases they can read the Megillah early. However, when they go in for the Yom HaKnisa, but villages that do not normally go to the larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays, so then they cannot just go in order to Chaparah and Megillah early. Alright. Tana, we talk a learning in the Brisa. Asar batlonin shebebeis haknesses. When we talk about these 10 people, we're talking about in the synagogue. Beilu amu makdimin v'lo ma'achrin. In these situations, they said makdimin v'lo ma'achrin. That we said that when it comes to Megillah, we're reading it early, but by those other examples, we do it later. My time, how come? Omer Rebbe Abba, Omer Shmuel, Omer Kro. Says Rebbe Abba, in the name of Shmuel, that it says in the pasuk. What does it say? V'lo yava. They do not pass it. That we don't want but you can't read the Megillah after Purim. It has to be, if you're going to do it at a different time, it has to be earlier. V'amar Baba Shmuel, says Rabbi in the name of Shmuel. Minayin she'monin yom l'shonim. Okay, how do you know that we don't count days for years? Shenemar l'chodshei hashana, because it says the months of the years. Chodoshim atamone l'shonim v'atamone yom l'shonim. You count months, not days. Meaning, so if a fellow says, I don't know why he's thinking, but he says he's not going to eat pizza for a year. So if it's the first of Nisan, so he doesn't eat pizza till the next first of Nisan. But we're not going to count like 365 days. It goes by months. And says the rabbis of Caesarea, I guess, in the name of Rabbi Abba. Alright. Minayin she'ein. Where am I? How do we know that we do not count hours for months? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ad chodesh yomim, until a month of days. Yomim ata mechashiv l'chodashim v'ata mechashiv shows l'chodashim. So you count days for months, not hours. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is that, say a fellow says that he's divorcing his wife if he doesn't, come home or something in a month. So now, if it's a short month, if it's a 29-day month, and he comes back, mamash, at the end of the 29 days, so then he's divorced, even though he came back, and then, even though technically every month is 29 and a half days, so technically it's not yet the end of the month, but we consider the month by whole days and not by half days, and therefore, by days and not by hours, and therefore, if it's a chodesh chaser, and we're saying that it's the month is over, so he's divorced, even though technically speaking, maybe he has another, 12 hours or so, but we go by the days, we don't go by the hours. Alright, that sounds very nice. Okay. Avol, but, Smanatse Kohanim, when it comes to these people who would donate wood to the temple altar, the Tisha B'Av, as well as the commemoration of Tisha B'Av, the Chagiga, the Hakol, as well as the Shalmi Chagiga on the Yom Tevim, and Hakol, the first year of the Shemitah cycle, when the king reads from the Sefer Torah in front of all the people. In those cases, we push it off later. Tisha B'Av, the reason why we push off Tisha B'Av as opposed to bring it closer is because we don't want to bring closer negative predicaments like Tisha B'Av. We don't want that to be earlier. If we need to, we'll push it off, but not make it closer. Chagiga v'hakol, when it comes to the Korban Chagiga, right? So if, if, let's say the first day of Sukkot falls out on a Shabbos, so you're not going to offer the Shalmi Chagiga on Shabbos, you'll push it off rather than making it earlier. Right? As well as Hakol, as well as when the king reads from the Sefer Torah on Sukkot of the first year of the Shemitah cycle, because the reason why we push it off as opposed to bump it up is because it's not yet the time, right? Korban Chagiga, for example, is offered on Sukkot. You can't offer it before Sukkot. So if you can't offer it on the first day of Sukkot because it's Shabbos, offer it on the second day of Sukkot, but can't do it earlier because it isn't Sukkot yet. There's no chiyuv yet to bring a Shalmi Chagiga. Tana, it's Tagatana Brisa. Chagiga v'chol zman Chagiga me'achrin. So says the Gemara quotes a Brisa. It says that the Korban Chagiga, all right, the Shalmi Chagiga that you offer on the Shalosh Regalim, v'chol zman Chagiga, as well as the entire time of the Chagiga, me'achrin, you push it off. So now what does this mean? That the Chagiga and the entire time of the Chagiga? So B'Shloma Chagiga, okay, so I understand what it means is that the Korban Chagiga itself you push off. Well, the Mikla B'Shabbata, that if the first day of Yom Tif, let's say the first day of Sukkot is a Shabbos, well, me'achrin, okay, so we push it off, right? So if the first day of Sukkot, let's say, is Shabbos, so then you're gonna defer the offering of the Shalmi Chagiga until the next day. Okay, what do you want me to tell you? Ma'achrin levasa Shabbat. Fine. Ela zman Chagiga mai. What does it mean that the time of the Chagiga we are ma'achrin. What's this time of the Chagiga? Amar Voshaya. So we're going to see Taka 3 answers. Here's the first one. Amar Voshaya. Hachika Amar. This is how you understand the Brisa. Chagiga b'Shabbos. Okay, so the Korban Chagiga, when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos. Ve'olas re'iyah afilu b'Yom Tov dizman Chagigahu. And when it comes to the Olas re'iyah, right, there's 2 korbanos that we bring on the Shalosh Regalim. One is the Shalmei Chagiga, Korban Shlomim. The other is the Olas re'iyah, Korban Ola that you offer on the Shalosh Regalim. So this is a Gemara that we learned about Masechta Beya, that according to Beis Shammai at least, so you can offer Shalmei Chagiga on Yom Tif. However, you do not offer Olas re'iyah on Yom Tif. So even though Yom Tif is the Zman Chagiga, right, you can offer the Korban Chagiga according to Beis Shammai on Yom Tif, but nonetheless, the Olas re'iyah you would not offer, you would push that off. So again, let's read it again. Amar Voshai says, Voshai Hachika Amar, this is how to understand the Brisa. The Brisa that says, Chagiga v'chol zman Chagiga ma'achrin, that the Chagiga and the entire time of the Chagiga we push off. So what does this mean? Hachika Amar, this is what it means. Chagiga b'Shabbos. So the Korban Chagiga, when Yom Tiv falls out on Shabbos, as well as V'olas re'iyah afilu b'Yom Tiv, as well as the Olas re'iyah, even when we're talking about on Yom Tiv itself, when you're allowed to offer the Shalmei Chagiga. So Dizman Chagiga, it's the time of the Chagiga, Ma'achin, we nonetheless push it off. Mani Beis Shammai, this is the opinion of Beis Shammai, the Tnan, as we learned in the Mishnah. Beis Shammai Eimim, says Beis Shammai, it's a Mishnah we saw in Masechta Beya, Mevin Shlam b'Yom Tiv ein Somchen Alein, that we can offer Korban Shlomim on Yom Tif, says Beis Shammai. We just don't lean upon the animal. You would lean upon the animal before Yom Tif starts, right? Because before you offer a Korban, you lean on it. So you would do that before Yom Tif. But on Yom Tif, otherwise, you can offer the Korban Shlomim, and part of the Korban Shlomim, of course, goes to the person who offers it. So it's Kilu Simchas Yom Tif for him. Avalo Olos, but you do not offer the Olas Re'iyah. You do not offer a Korban Ola on Yom Tif. Whereas Beis Hillel say, V'in Shlomim v'Olos v'Somchen Alein, you can offer Korban Shlomim, you can offer Olas Re'iyah on Yom Tif, and you could do Smicha, all that stuff as well. So, the way that Rebbe Oshaya explains this Brisa, it says that the Chagiga and the Kozman Chagiga me'achrin, it means that the Korban Chagiga, when when the first day of Yom Tif falls out on Shabbos, or the Olas Re'iyah, even on a regular Yom Tif, which is a time for the time that you're allowed to offer the Chagiga, meaning even Beis Shammai says you're allowed to offer the Korban, right, the Shalmei Chagiga on Yom Tif, but you would not be allowed to offer the Olas Re'iyah on Yom Tif. So in both those cases, by the Korban Chagiga on Shabbos and the Olas Re'iyah on Yom Tif, you push it off, you do not bump it up. Rave Omer says Rave, Chagiga, Kolzman Chagiga Ma'achrin Tvei Lo. So says Rava, what this means is that the Korban Chagiga, you can push it off as long as, right, as during the festival, but not more than that. Let's go right there for a second. The Tanan, as we learn in a Mishnah, Mishlochog b'Yom Tov Arishin Shel Chog, if a fellow did not bring the Shalmei Chagiga on the first day of Sukkot, Chogeg ve'holech es kol haregel kulo v'Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chog, so he can offer the Korban Chagiga the entire duration of Sukkot, right? So if you didn't offer the Korban Chagiga on the first day of Sukkot, so you have the entire Sukkot as well as Shmini Atzeres to offer your Shalmei Chagiga of a regel. But once the regel passes, once the festival passes, well then Velochag, if he did not bring his Shalmei Chagiga, ein chayav b'achar yuso, so he doesn't make it up. So that's how Rava understands Chagiga v'chol zman Chagiga, that the Korban Chagiga, and during the entire time of the festival, so you push it off, but you do not bring it earlier. If you didn't offer the Korban Chagiga on the first day of Sukkot, so you can offer it on the second day, or the third, or the fourth, until the end of the festival. Ravashi Omar, says Ravashi, Chagiga v'chol zman Chagiga ma'achrin. What does this mean? V'afilu atzeres dechad yoma. Even Shavuos, which is only one day. So if it's only one day, so what happens if Chagiga if Shavuos, for example, falls out on a Shabbos? So what do you do about the Shalmei Chagiga? right? When it comes to Sukkot, for example, if the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, we said you could bring the Shalmei Chagiga during the rest of Sukkot. What about Shavuos, which is only one day? If it's Shabbos and you can't bring the Shalmei Chagiga, so when do you offer it? So, Me'achrin, we can nonetheless push it off. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Modim Shimchol Atzeres Lios B'Shabbos Sheyom Tvoach Achar HaShabbos. That everyone agrees that when Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, that you'll offer the Korban Chagiga after Shabbos, even though it's going to be right, meaning on Sunday, even though it's no longer Shavuos. So we see that even Shavuos, there's Tashlumin for the duration of the week, even though Shavuos is only a one day festival. All right, that sounds like great stuff. Okay, Givaldig. so says the Gemara, Omer Belazar, Omer B'Chanina. Uwa. That's Givaldig. Rebbe not to Netiyah B'Purim. Uwa. Rebbe Take planted a tree on Purim. Very interesting. V'achatz b'korona shel tzipori b'shivos b'tamas. And Taka bathed sort of out in the open on Shivos b'tamas. Meaning he went to the public bathhouse on Shivos b'tamas. Like he wasn't hiding the fact that he was going to the bathhouse on Shivos b'tamas. V'kish lakar Tisha B'av v'lo hodulo. And he wanted to uproot Tisha B'av, but they said no way. Amar l'fanav of Rebbe Abba bar Zabda. Now Rebbe Abba bar Zabda says to Rebbe Lazar, he says, Lo kachoya ma'isa. 1 second, that's not what happened. Rebbe did not want to uproot Tisha B'av. Tisha B'av shchalios b'Shabbos hava. That year Tisha B'av fell out on Shabbos, v'dachinu la'achar Shabbos, and it got pushed off to Sunday. And Rebbe's opinion was, whereas Rebbe says, look, we're not going to fast on Sunday just because. You know, if Tisha B'av falls out on Shabbos, and therefore we're not going to fast on Shabbos, so we won't fast that year. There's no point of fasting on a Sunday. That was Rebbe's opinion. The rabbis felt otherwise and felt that no, we should make it up and there should be a fast on Sunday. To which Rebbe Lazar responded to Rebbe Abba bar Zabda, he says 2 is better than 1. Because if it was just me, I would have thought that Rebbe actually tried to uproot Tisha B'av. But you helped me out and clarified for me that no, Rebbe wasn't trying to uproot Tisha B'av. That particular year, Tisha B'av fell out on Shabbos, and Rebbe felt, look, if we're not going to fast on Shabbos, let's just not fast at all. In fact, the Gemara wants to know, if Rebbe Eichinot Netiyah B'Purim, 1 second, how did Rebbe plant a tree on Purim? V'atani Rav Yosef, but Rav Yosef taught, Simcha Mishta V'Yomtiv, that the pasuk says that Purim is a day of happiness, of feasting, of festivaling, Yom Tiving. Simcha Melamed Shasurim Behesped. When it says that Purim is a day of happiness, it means that we don't eulogize. Mishta is a day of feasting. Melamed Shasu B'Tainis. You're not allowed to fast. Yom Tiv, and it's also a holiday. Melamed Shasu B'Aziyaz Melacha. It teaches that you're not allowed to do malacha. No. So how is Rebbe able to plant a tree on Purim if you're not allowed to do malacha on Purim, and planting a tree is a malacha? So Rebbe by a Beisar Hava, well, Rebbe was obligated in Purim on the 14th, right? Of course, we're only obligated in Purim 1 day. I live in Yerushalayim, so I'm fortunate that I celebrate Purim on the 15th day of Adar. It's a gewaldige thing to celebrate Shushan Purim. So, although last year I was in Chutz La'aretz, so I celebrated on the 14th. I went to my friend's house. We got fashniket. So in Chutz La'aretz. So Rebbe bar Beisar Hava. So Rebbe was he celebrated Purim on the 14th. V'chinota b'chameser nota. And when he planted the tree on Purim, it was Shushan Purim, and he didn't celebrate Shushan Purim. He celebrated regular Purim. Ini, is that true? Rebbe b'Tiveria Hava. Uwa. Rebbe was in Tveria. Rebbe was in a few places. He was in Beis Shairim. He was in Tveria. Was he also in Yavne, I think, as well? But okay, I guess at the time Rebbe was in Tveria. And Tveria is a walled city dating back to the period of Yoshua ben Nun. in which case, the 15th is Taka when he would celebrate Purim. So Ella, Rebbe bar Chamesar Hava, no, so flip it around. Rebbe was obligated on Purim to celebrate Purim on the 15th day of Adar, V'chinoto bar Beisar Hava, and when he planted his tree, it was on the 14th, on regular Purim. When we Pshitale de Tiveria Mukefes Choma Mimosu Shua Benunu, to which the Gemara says, wait a second, was it so obvious to Rebbe that Tzipori, wait, what? No, Tiveria, is it so obvious to Rebbe that Tiveria would be considered a place that had a wall from the time of Joshua? But Chizkiah, after all, read Megillah in Tiveria on both the 14th and the 15th of Adar, Misapkale, because he was unsure. Chizkiah didn't know if Tiveria was considered a city that had a wall around it from the time of Joshua or not. So therefore, how could Rebbe simply celebrate the 15th day of Adar as celebrate Shushan Purim? But apparently it's not so clear cut that Tiveria is considered a walled city from the time of Joshua. So the Gemara says, Look, Chizkiah wasn't sure if Tiveria had a wall from the time of Joshua, therefore he read Megillah on the 14th and 15th. But Rebbe was clear. Rebbe was clear that Tiveria is considered is a city that had a wall from the time of Joshua, and therefore he celebrated Purim on the 15th day of Adar, and he planted a tree on the 14th day of Adar. But one second. But even if Rebbe knows that Tiveria is a walled city from the time of Joshua, and the 15th day of Adar is when they celebrate Purim, but nonetheless, Mishari, does that mean that he's allowed to plant a tree on the 14th day of Adar? V'aksiv b'Megillas Tainis. Taka says in Megillas Tainis that we're familiar with because we learned Masechta Tainis, right? This sort of accounting of days that we do not fast on them. Some of them we don't eulogize on them. Residual cough. That the 14th and 15th days of Adar, Yomei Puraya Inun, they are the days of Purim, and we do not eulogize on those days, on the 14th and 15th days of Adar. The Amr Rave, and says Rave lo nitzrucha ella, what it's teaching us is le'asor es shel zebaze ves shel zebaze, that which is not allowed on one is not allowed on the other. And therefore, if Rav is saying that what's prohibited on one is prohibited on the other, so then if on the 15th Rebbe would be unable to plant a tree, so then on the 14th Oichit, also on the 14th he would be unable to plant a tree. So and for the Gemara, that when we say that what's forbidden on one is forbidden on the other, that's talking about eulogizing and fasting. That just like you're not allowed to eulogize and fast on the 15th, if you're a Shushan Purim fellow like me, so also the same thing would apply to the 14th of Purim, that you would not fast, you would not eulogize. Avol, milacha, yom echad v'sulo. However, the prohibition against doing milacha, against doing work on Purim, only applies on the day that you celebrate. So therefore, if Rebbe was a Shushan Purim man, so on Shushan Purim he would not be allowed to plant a tree, but on the 14th day of Adar he's allowed to plant a tree. Ini, is this so? But Rav saw a certain fellow who was planting flax on Purim. Vilatie velo tzamach kitane, and Rav cursed him, and his flax didn't grow. All right, no. So we see that taka you're not allowed to do the malacha. Hasan bayoma hava. The Gemara says, yeah, but that's because it was Purim for that fellow, and on Purim you're not allowed to do malacha. That is why Rav cursed that fellow, said his flax should not grow. All right. Rabbi B'Rava Omar says, Rabbi B'Rava afilu tema b'yome, says Rabbi Rabbi Bre de Rava, you can even say that Rebbe planted this tree on Shushan Purim, on the day that's Purim. But Hesped v'tainis kiblu alayu malach lo kabilu alayu, that the Yidden accepted upon themselves that on Purim they don't fast, on Purim they don't eulogize. However, they do malacha. Malacha lo kabilu alayu, they didn't accept upon themselves in Isser malacha. That if you look at the Psukim, the first pasuk, the earlier pasuk says that that Purim is a day of a day of happiness and feasting and Yom Tiv. But then later on the pasuk says Lasos Osam, to make them Yimei Mishta v'Simcha, days of feasting and of happiness, Vilu Yom Tiv Lo Ksiv. But it doesn't say anything about Yom Tiv, about making it a day that would be also b'melacha. So actually says Rabbi de Rava that the Yidden never accepted upon themselves in Isser Malacha on Purim. Ve'ela Rab my time melati le'ugaver. But if that's the case, then why did Rab curse that fellow who was planting flax on Purim? That his flax shouldn't grow. What? He's not doing anything wrong if the Yidden never accepted in Isser Malacha. So then Tvarim Mutarn B'Achirim Nagu in Isser Hava V'Asur de Rebbe Lo Nog. So Rav says, well, because that fellow who's planting flax was in a place where they did not do malacha on Yom Tiv, on Purim, and therefore something that technically speaking is permitted, but other people have determined that it's also, so that's what it was. But where Rebbe lived, that wasn't the custom. Where Rebbe lived, they would do malacha on Purim. Therefore, he planted a tree. However, Rav witnessed this fellow planting flax in a place where they didn't do malacha. Therefore, he cursed the little guy. Right, Rav cursed the little guy. I don't know if I said Rav, but Rav cursed the little guy because he was planting flax in a place where he shouldn't have been planting on Purim. All right, V by Semu, or if you want, I will say Le'olam Nog. Really, you can even say that where Rebbe lived, I guess in Tveria, they would not plant. They would not do malacha on Purim. But nonetheless, Rebbe was planting a plant of happiness, of rejoicing. As we learn in the Mishnah of Ru'elu v'lo nenu, as we learn about in Masechta Tainis, that if the fast days passed and there was no rain, we learn about the 13 fast days. If all 13 fast days passed and there was no rain, so then we do less business with building and planting. We minimize the getting married. Vitana Allah, and we taka Torah, and it was taught about it binyan shel simcha, that when we talk about building, we're talking about building of happiness. Netiya shel simcha, planting of happiness. Eizeu binyan shel simcha, what is considered a building of happiness? Zabone Beis Chasanus Livno. This is a fellow who builds like a chuppah for his son. That sounds very nice. Ezu Netiya Shel Simcha, what's a planting of happiness? Zanotea Avarneke Shel Malachim. That's a fellow who plants a certain tree for kings. I don't know, you plant a tree and give it to the king or something. What do you want me to tell you? Anyways, so Rebbe was, I guess, planting some kind of fancy tree, and even though technically you're not allowed to, I guess, do malacha on Purim, but Netiya Shel Simcha, I guess, would be an exception. Alright. Gufa, we said earlier, Chizki Kari B'Tveria by Besa of Chamesa Misapkale, Imukefes Chomim Imos Yeshua Benun Hi Lo. Again, we said earlier, Chizkiya Kari B'Tveria by Besa of Chamesa. The Chizkiya would read the Megilla in Tveria on both the 14th and the 15th of Adar, because Misapkale, he was not sure. He was unsure. He was uncertain if Tveria was a walled city from the time of Joshua. Misapkale Milsa de Tveria. 1 second. Was Chizkiah really uncertain about the status of Tveria? But it was taka taught in the pasuk V'ari Mivtzar Atzidim, that these walled cities, Tser v'chamas rakas v'chinaris, Tzer Chamas Rakas and Kineres, V'Kaimel and Rakas o Tveria, and we say that Rakas is Tveria. So basically, we seem to have a pasuk. Where's this pasuk? In Yoshua. A pasuk in Yoshua. Givaldik. Yoshua ben Nun. And it says that the Ari Mivtzar Atzidim, that these sort of walled cities, these strong cities, of which Rakas, which is Tveria, was one of them. So Hainu Tamid de Misapkale, so Gemara says, Eina Chinami, yes. Tveria had a wall around it from the time of Joshua. But Chizkiah was concerned with the following. Mishum dechad gisa shuru diyoma havos. Because Tveria, one of its walls was actually the sea. So there was like 3 walls, and then the 4th side was the Kinneret, was the Sea of Galilee. So it wasn't a proper wall. So it was the Galilee, the Sea of the Galilee was on the other side, and therefore that's why Chizkiah was uncertain if Kinneret, if Tveria was considered a walled city or not from the time of Joshua. Even though 3 walls were from Joshua, there wasn't actually a 4th wall. It was just the Kinneret. So Yehochi, if that's the case, am I misapkale? But then, if you're telling me that one wall of Tveria was the sea, then what's the question? Obviously, it's not considered walled. Vadai lav chomai, certainly it's not considered a wall. The Tanya, as we talk learn in the Bryce in the context of Bate Ori Choma, I think it comes up from time to time that a fellow who sells a house in a walled city, it has its own special halachis, and it says in defining a walled city, the Tanya Shalo Choma Vilo Shor Igor, that when it says that it has a wall and not a if you have like townhouses, it has to be like a proper separate wall, not just like a bunch of houses that are next to each other that memela make a wall. And when it says that the wall has to be around it to the exclusion of Tveria, that it's really only walled on 3 sides and the 4th wall, so to speak, is the sea. That would not count as a bate for bate arichoma. So we see that Tveria certainly is not, right, because of the sea there. It's certainly not considered a walled city. But and for the Gemara that in bate arichoma lo masapkale. Chizkiah had no question about bate arichoma, that Tveria would not be considered a walled city with regard to the halachas of selling real estate in a walled city. What he was uncertain about was the Indian mikra of Megillah, with regarding to reading the Megillah, my prazim. How do you define prazim umam mukafin? How do you define the distinction between walled cities and non-walled cities in the context of reading the Megillah? Dechsive gabe mikra Megillah, that it says by mikra Megillah, mishum dahane migalu vani lo migalu, is the concern that prazi cities, unwalled cities, are revealed, whereas walled cities are completely covered and concealed. V'anami Megilla, and Tveria also is revealed; it's visible because of the side that is the sea, and therefore maybe it's not considered a walled city. Or maybe the difference between a walled city and a non-walled city is that one is protected and the other one isn't, and Tveria is protected because even the wall that's the sea, it's sort of the sea provides protection. And that's why Chizkiah was uncertain if Tveria was considered a walled city or not, because one of its walls was the sea, and therefore he's not sure exactly how to relate to that wall. Is it about protection, in which case the wall of the sea offers protection, or it is about being sort of concealed, in which case it's not concealed if you have an open wall, right? If the wall is the sea. That's why Chizkiah was uncertain. Rav Asi Kari Megillah b'Hutzol b'Arbeso v'Chameser. Rav Asi read the Megillah in Hutzol on the 14th and 15th days of Adar, because Mesapkele Mukefes Choma Mimos Yeshua Benun he loved, because he wasn't sure if Hutzol was a walled city from the time of Joshua or not. Ikadam, those who say Amar Rav Asi, says Rav Asi, I Hutzol Deves Binyamin Mukefes Choma Mimos Yeshua. The Rav Asi Taka says that this Hutzol is Taka considered certainly a walled city from the time of Joshua. Alright, Gavaldik, friends, that was Daf Hey Masechet Megillah. We learned today that even though there are other situations where we push off things, such as the Korban Chagiga or Tisha B'Av, right? If we can't do it at its proper time, so we push it off. However, when it comes to Megillah, we do it early because the pasuk says "V'lo Yavor," that you should not pass Purim without reading the Megillah. You can't read the Megillah after the fact. We then saw this interesting brisa which says that a Chagiga v'chozman Chagiga, and on the time of the Chagiga, you push it off. And the question, what is exactly does it mean that the Chagiga in the entire time of the Chagiga? So we saw three opinions. One was the opinion of Oshaya, which is that what it means is that the Korban Chagiga on when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, as well as the Olas Re'iyah, even on Yom Tov, you push off to the next day rather than bring it early because the time hasn't yet arrived. Rav says that what it means is that you can offer the Korban Chagiga during the entire festival. So, for example, if you didn't offer Korban Chagiga on the first day of Sukkot, you could bring it throughout Sukkot and even Shmini Atzeres, but after that you can no longer bring it. And Rav Ashi says that the Chiddush is that even when it comes to Shavuos, which is only one day, you can nonetheless offer the Korban Chagiga and do Tashlumin. For example, if Shavuos fell out on the Shabbos, you could do it for for an entire week. We then saw a very interesting attribution, I guess, that Rebbe planted a tree on Purim. And the question was, how could Rebbe plant a tree on Purim? How can he do Melacha on Purim? So one answer was that, well, Rebbe lived in Tiberia where Purim was on the 15th and Itaka planted a tree on the 14th. Alright. Another answer is that, well, the Yidden never accepted upon themselves to refrain from doing Melacha on Purim. They accepted upon themselves getting fashnikit, eating Suda, Matanos Avyonim, etc., but not Isra Melacha. Alright. Or you could say that even they did accept, that even they wouldn't do Melacha. However, Rebbe was planting an Atiyah Shel Simcha, like a tree for the king or something like that. Now, we saw a very interesting question when it comes to Tiberia, is Tiberia, we saw Chizkiah was uncertain if Tiberia was considered a walled city or not when it comes to reading the Megillah, because one of the walls of Tiberia is actually the sea, which is not technically a wall. And the question is, so what does it go based on? Does it go based on the fact that it needs to be concealed, and if it's revealed, it's a problem? And Tiberia is revealed because it's open on one side, technically, right, on this from the sea. Or do we say it's about being protected? And Tiberia is protected because it's got a wall on three sides, and the other side is the sea. So therefore, it is relatively protected, and that is why Chizkiah was uncertain if Tiberia was considered a walled city or not. Friends, that was Daf Hey Masechet Megillah. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.